You're listening to The High Five. One topic, 5 minutes. For stoners, by stoners. Learn more at The High Five Show on socials or randomaxnetwork.com. Because a friend with weed is a friend indeed. And sometimes you just need a high five.
Hey there, it's Alex Guarnaschelli. I'm here today to get a little nerdy and talk about something called Project Mohole. That's Mohole. It is the funniest project name in the world, I think. It's a project from the 1960s, basically an expedition to drill through Earth's crust and obtain a sample of the mantle layer. Let's get into it. The Earth has layers, and we are on the crust, and directly underneath the crust is the mantle. And the reason we know sort of that there's these layers there is because we've studied seismic waves, and we understand that, I don't understand shit, but scientists study these waves and basically can detect where the Earth's density changes. So the part of the crust that becomes the mantle, or I guess you could say the part of the mantle that becomes the crust, is this layer called the Mohorovičić discontinuity. Mohorovičić discontinuity, which is named after this Croatian man who I believe studied like seismic waves. So to all our Croatian listeners, I'm sorry for butchering that name. A lot of people in America, and I'm sure just English speakers in general, call it the Moho discontinuity for short. And so essentially, this project is called Project Mohole because they're drilling a hole through the Moho discontinuity. So they called it Project Mohole. That's it. That's gold. So basically in the 1960s, a group of scientists who belonged to the American Miscellaneous Society, which sounds so made up, but it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, right? People who have multiple interests, I think. They met at a conference for this society and got to talking and thought, wouldn't it be crazy if we could get to the mantle? And they posited it's way too thick. Earth's crust is way too thick to get to the mantle if we were to drill from the surface. But they suggested, what if we got to a layer of the ocean and drilled from the ocean floor? It's much, much thinner. The crust is much, much thinner. We could theoretically reach the mantle. So they set out from this conference being like, yes, we will now devote the next few years of our lives to this, more or less. I'm sure they had other stuff going on, but they got to work. They obtained funding from the National Science Foundation. They, I'm sure recruited plenty of people to help them, even with the first phase. But that was their goal. They were like, okay, let's get to doing a test phase, right? Before we actually try and do the thing whole hog, we're gonna see if we can build the technology to do this. Because at this point, there was no such thing as an oil rig that drilled in the ocean. So that piece is kind of cool too. They basically get a hold of this old, I think some retired ship, and they rig a series of propellers around the ship to propel outward to keep it in place so that it's stationary for their drilling. What do you know? Human ingenuity, a lot to be said for it. They create that, also covering this project for Life magazine was John Steinbeck, author of Mice and Men, if you're familiar. So phase 1 is just experimenting to see if they can drill in this vessel that's unanchored by traditional methods. Phase 2 was going to be sort of like an intermediate, sort of upping the ante to see if they could drill deeper, I think. And then phase 3 was going to be the actual, like, let's get to the mantle. Let's get that sweet, sweet sample. They had millions of dollars from the National Science Foundation. And by the time it was all said and done, they completed phase 1 wildly successfully. Like, it cost under budget. It was only $1.7 million by the time they were finished. I think they were granted $2.5 million or something like that. And it took less time. Everything basically went off without a hitch. They drilled off of Guadalupe Island, and this wasn't like a particularly deep area. But the results of that phase 1 drilling was like super helpful because they pulled up Miocene age samples, like of sediment or whatever, which I think hadn't been done before. Like, we hadn't accessed that layer of the Earth's crust before. The deepest hole that they drilled was 11,700 feet deep in water. And then the hole itself was 601 feet deep below the seafloor. So that's a total of 12,300 feet beneath the surface of the ocean that they did just on this floating boat that they, rigged with this propelling system. They get ready for phase 2. They're up in the ante. They're raising more money. And by more money, I mean like substantially more money. So they had drawn, this is a pretty high profile project at this point, and the National Science Foundation basically took it over. They were like, okay, this is going to be a much bigger thing. We need to handle this. And a bunch of, different organizations pitched in money and sort of had a say in it. And it just became super bloated. So in 1961 was when they had their successful phase 1. And by 1966, they had raised / spent $57 million. So they went from going under budget with $1.7 million for phase 1 to $57 million in 1966. And then nothing happened. Basically, there was so much conflict amongst the stakeholders in the project. They couldn't get on the same page in terms of what the goal was for the project, where they should drill, how they should drill, like if they should basically, like, was the method that they used sufficient, or should they try to continue to innovate? And this high profile project became a total bust. It's like considered a massive failure in many ways because it never came to fruition. They never even got to phase 2, so they definitely never got to drill down to the mantle. So, like, definitionally, it's a failure. $57 million from 1966 today is worth $508,600,000 and some change. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So I see why it's considered a massive failure, but a fascinating story. In any case, look it up. It's worth reading more about. Thanks for listening.
This has been a production from the Random Acts Network. Whether you're looking for scary stories, comedy, or candid conversation, you can find it all on the Random Acts Network. To support or learn more, please visit randomactsnetwork.com.